So I was able to talk to Ralph. To your question, the one thing that he told me, you sound and it feels like I'm still working with Pat. And I was like, wow. He goes, yeah. He goes, it gives me goosebumps, like, and I was like, the best, if any, compliment I can get, having actual, Daniel LaRusso saying like, yeah, you sound like Mr. Miyagi.
Hey everyone, in today's episode we have Brian Takahashi, who played young Miyagi in Cobra Kai Season 6 Part 2. In today's episode, we get to hear how he became Mr. Miyagi in terms of preparation, the stories on set, and what his initial reaction was when the episode was fully aired on Netflix. Now, may I please welcome Brian Takahashi. So, Brian, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. So, how did you really get this role? Like, kind of walk me through like the audition, the callback to being casted, and life after the episode was aired.
Sure, sure. So, initially when I got the audition, it it's weird because if you audition for Cobra Kai, it doesn't say Cobra Kai initially. It says the Arborist. It's a different code name. But this one came as Cobra Kai, so I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But the role was not, young Miyagi. It was just a, fictitious name. I think it was like Yuto or something like that. But as you read the audition, you're like, oh, okay, this is what they're trying to do. And the role was, it looked like it was something they're just riding to see if you can even do, like a Miyagi type thing. But basically, it was just a character that reminded Daniel of Mr. Miyagi. That's it. Um, I had really nothing to do with the story or anything. So when you're reading it, you're just like, oh, okay, he's at a tournament. He happens to hear somebody that sounds like Mr. Miyagi, and he walks over and he's like, "You remind me of my sensei." And that was the scene. You just did the scene. There wasn't I don't think there was a callback. I think it was pretty just, you send it in, and that's pretty much it. Um, but I didn't hear back from them for quite a while, and then my wife, she reminded me that it was right around the time that she got COVID and eventually I got COVID. This is like, I think this was like earlier this year. We avoided getting COVID for the longest time because of both our professions. But she's a teacher, so it happens. And it literally hit right after I sent that audition in. So it was like I was feeling fine, and then like I think a couple days later, it was like I was like, oh yeah, that's right, and I was just completely out. It's the first time I got it. So I kind of forgot about it, and it was something that it was in the back of my mind, but because it wasn't really Mr. Miyagi, it was just someone kind of reminiscent. It was like, oh, okay, it'd be cool if I got it. But I remember thinking, man, that would be awesome if this was something that led to like a Miyagi type role. How cool would that be? Being Japanese American, it's like the dream gig to get a character to be. And I remember seeing like the outside dates or the beginning of where they're going to shoot, and it was getting closer and closer to that date. And I was just thinking, man, I would love to get this role. Just love even if it's not that, I would love to get it. But when it got closer to it, I was like, oh, maybe they didn't, maybe they went with someone else. Nah, that's okay, it's fine. So my wife, she does tarot card readings, so she did a reading, and she's like, oh, it seems like this is, gonna be good. And I was like, well, we'll see. I don't like to get my hopes up, but there was something there too. And I don't really lean into the whole like mysticism and stuff like that. I should, but because of my wife. But something within this, audition was like, man, I just kind of feel this. Like I don't know what it is, but I kind of feel it. And I think it was like a week or so before the actual start of the out date to start when you're shooting. I got the confirmation from my agent saying that, oh, hey, you're booked. And when they sent it, they're like, oh, Yuto, whatever the character name was, just a, you know, fictitious name. This is actually for young Mr. Miyagi. And I was like, what? Wow, okay. And Yeah, so that was the thing. I was like, whoa, that's crazy. But the script, what you guys ended up seeing was completely different than the audition. So I was thinking, oh, maybe, you know, that is the scene. The audition was the scene. Did you kind of change the names? But obviously it was not. And when I finally got the script, I was like, oh, it's completely different. So that was basically it. It didn't really hit because first you can't tell anybody. Obviously, my wife was there, but you can't say anything, and I was like, oh, that's great. And the fact that, I don't even know what that means. Like, I'm like, what do they mean by young Mr. Miyagi? I'm like, that's kind of crazy. Um, so, being in the entertainment business for a while, you sort of just kind of hold back that, initial reaction. You kind of reserve that because you don't know what's coming down the pipe. It could just be like, oh yeah, we're gonna put like they did with the deep fake on you, and it's not really you. Like they could do like the whole Luke Skywalker thing. So. But just to be that character and see that name, I was like, okay, that's cool. That's really cool. So
Were you more concerned about making sure you're the best Miyagi based on like Cobra Kai and like the Karate Kid movies, or did you want more of like a personal perspective or personal spin to the character?
yeah, so given that it is a young Mr. Miyagi, the first thing any actor should do is just go back and jump into the source material. So I went back and rewatched every single Karate Kid movie I can get my hands on, or just clips of it, just trying to get the way he talks, the way the cadence, certain inflections and things like that. But growing up Japanese American, amongst my friends, even just Asian Americans in general, everyone sort of does like the whole like Mr. Miyagi accent, and it's a very different accent than just a regular Japanese accent. And even in the audition piece, I forgot to mention that even though it wasn't Mr. Miyagi, they wanted you to do a specifically Miyagi-esque accent. And even I remember our agent was like, "Don't do a Japanese accent. They want you to do Mr. Miyagi accent. Do you know who that is?" I'm like, "Yeah, I know who that." And I was thinking, if you don't know what a Mr. Miyagi accent is, then you shouldn't be auditioning for this because I think you should inherently already know what that is. So going back and just kind of, looking really about the mannerisms and the cadence. I wasn't trying to, parrot Pat Morita's performance because that's his, but just to be like, okay, how does he pronounce certain things? How does he say certain things? Um, he likes to use a lot of third person. We prefer, refers to himself as Miyagi. So it's really that. I got a lot of good pointers from Tamlin Tomita, who's in Karate Kid 2. She's got a blank on her name. I think it's Kimiko. Yeah. And her and I are really big in the Japanese American community. Not big in terms of like, people know me, but we do a lot for the Japanese community. We volunteer and we do a lot of things. So we see each other quite often. So outside of just my wife and like my family, she was the other person that I kind of reached out to and said, "Hey, you got to keep a secret," but I, can kind of get some pointers from her. And she did. She said, "Hey, because she's worked with Pat. The his body mannerisms. He walks with his chest. He's kind of barrel chested, very intense gaze, things like that. So all those little tidbits just really kind of inform me, like, okay, how you know am I gonna go about doing this? And then just a couple days leading up to me flying out to Atlanta, I just started to practice. Just started talking like I'm trying to get little mannerisms and like the whole like yeah, your best karate inside, always look eye, all those kind of things like that. To just kind of be like, okay, I don't really know what they're going to be giving me until I finally get the script. And then when I got the script, it was funny enough, the first two lines. were all in Japanese. They wanted it in Japanese, and the first two lines, meaning when I say, lesson question mark, and then the whole, always eager to understand. Not that was all in Japanese, and then they happened to just do like, hey, can you do one in English? And I was like, cool. So I was able to use the whole, like, Miyagi accent to do that one. At the end with the deep fake, I don't really know what they did, but I did do that part too, where I'm standing over and I deliver that line. That was the only line that was specifically written to be in English and as Mr. Miyagi talking, when he's, yeah, Miyagi never tell you everything. Yeah, that whole line, like that I actually did that line. So I was like, cool, that's the line that I'm going to be doing this accent with. And I really practiced with that one. But they ended up doing like a CG thing, so I don't actually know if they used any part of that. I might have just been just like the template for that. Because listening in, it does sound uh, a lot more like Pat. And I think I read a couple articles saying that they took audio clips from all the existing, Karate Kid movies where Pat is talking, and he sort of just took that and fed it through a machine, and that's what they got with this. So, but that's pretty much it in terms of preparation. I didn't do too much. Like I said, I wasn't trying to mimic or parrot what Pat did, because I mean nobody can do that, right? It's just, yeah, that his Mr. Miyagi is his Mr. Miyagi. You can't ever compare that to anybody, and it doesn't matter if it was me or some other actor. So I just tried to stay true to what the reason why that accent was there, and the intention behind it. Just looking at different interviews with Pat, that's what was the backbone of my interpretation of young Miyagi.
Yeah, when I first watched the episode, I kind of like thought to myself, like, this guy has like the moves down, the accent, the kind of like persona or like the aura of Mr. Miyagi. Like, did you have like previous martial arts experience walking into this?
I did. So yeah, so I grew up learning Shorin Kempo. That was like my main. And then I took Shotokan and just a different, different other martial arts from here and there. I did stunts for a good while too. So all those sort of like played in when we got two sets. So the funny story about the martial arts, when the booking was still kind of like, oh, you're the favorite. It was like, the production asked, does Brian do martial arts? He needs to be able to fight. And so my agent asked me, they're like, yeah, can you? I was like, yeah, I can fight. Depending. Well, I'm like, well, depending on what you want, but like, yeah, I can learn choreography. And ironically enough, I was supposed to fly out. I think it was supposed to fly out a week before I actually did fly out. So I was supposed to be in Atlanta for 2 weeks, and I think that was for or slated to for me to do choreography, learn it, and get it into my bones, and do that. But unfortunately, I had a conflict with another project that I had to go do some sort of like military training for, and that couldn't be rescheduled. So I was like, damn, talking to my agents, like, is there any way, they can work around? And they kept going back and forth. And finally they got back and they're like, yeah, we can move up your flyout date, but it's gonna literally cut down your rehearsal time to like nothing. Can you do it? And I was like, sure. I'm not gonna say no. So I'm like, sure. So flew out, landed, I think it was like a Monday or a Tuesday, flew out, landed in Atlanta, and I went straight to set and talked to the stunt coordinators, Don and Ken, and just said, "Hey, is there like any previs? Is there anything I could look at?" But obviously, they were still, in the midst of choreographing all the different fights that you guys saw throughout season six, part two, which I didn't know yet because I wasn't given any information prior to. So they're like, "Oh, we don't really have anything concrete yet, but we'll let you know." Because you're here a day earlier, we weren't expecting. So I was like, that's fine, Go in the next day, they had the fight, worked with uh Craig. I'm blanking on his last name, but he doubles for Ralph Macchio. Awesome guy, and we just worked it. And staying true to Okinawa karate, they you know basically created that fight to kind of mimic the stuff that Mr. Miyagi was teaching Daniel in Karate Kid 1. They wanted to do a callback to that. So if Eagle Eye fans can watch, and I think a couple people have seen, reaction videos, they do spot that, oh, he's doing basically all the blocks that he got taught. And they just made it so the counter punching and all that stuff like mimicked what Mr. Miyagi was doing to him when he was like, Yosh, and then he just started attacking him and he was blocking. They wanted to do that again. So, and the fact that, Ralph is right-handed, all the attacks were coming from the left side, which was a little tasking on my end, but yeah, I was like, okay, that's fine. So the kicks, strikes, all that thing was like, heavily on the left side, so he can block with his right hand. But yeah, that was a pretty intense couple days. I learned the choreo. Tuesday, went back to my hotel, iced up, and I think actually no, was it? I think I might have flew in on Tuesday, and then Wednesday we did one more rehearsal, and then Thursday I think we were shooting. Or I could be mistaken. It's beginning of the year, so I kind of forget. But I basically was around 1 or 2 days rehearsal. That's it. And then just me in my hotel room, just kind of looking at the, video that we filmed, going over the moves, like, okay, this is it, punch, punch, right, block, block. And then we did a quick little rehearsal with Ralph on the day of, and that was pretty much it. And then we just waited, and then they said, let's shoot it. So yeah, what you don't see is like my arms were like completely bruised up from just like doing everything. Because they go hard. So if people think, oh, hey, they're not actually, they're like, no, we're actually blocking and stuff like that. Of course, when you're fighting against Ralph, you're not going to be striking fully, and because I'm assuming because they knew I had stunt experience, they allowed me to do stuff that usually was just reserved for a stunt double like Dom to do. But some of the more like not dangerous ones, but I guess the ones where if you weren't really looking at the person attacking, they felt safer for a stunt person to do it too. Same thing, vice versa. Like if I'm fighting Ralph and it's on me, it's Craig who is Ralph, and then that way I can actually really throw that punch, not connecting, but throw it, and I don't have to slow it down a little bit, because then he can just block it with his hand, and that's what I mean. Like I'm really throwing that punch, I'm really getting blocked, so like it's attacking, Shotokan karate. It's like you break through that defense, like it's. So yeah, my arms and legs are being they're paying for them, but it looked good. So. But that was the extent of like the martial arts experience. Like it really was just like the great choreography that Ken and Dom came up with. That is what you saw. The martial arts comes into play when just knowing your distance, I would say, especially for film and TV. That's the most important thing because again, when you're in a fight, the distance helps you from getting hurt, or actually connecting that punch when you're on film and TV. It's kind of the same thing, but it's the opposite. Distance helps you from getting hurt, but the opposite is not connecting that punch. Be like, okay, if I take a little step back, I can throw a straight punch. I know I'm not going to hit the person that I'm throwing it to, but because the camera is stacked or the way they're shooting it, it looks like I connected. So yeah, but everybody there was great. Everybody who's on the show, they have a dojo. They have an actual dojo they call the stunt dojo, and they just work out. Yeah, it's amazing. I walked in there and I was like, wow, you guys are just like just working out like crazy, practicing everything that you could think of. So it's a legit, martial arts experience, I would say. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that scene was like super like multi-dimensional, like especially the ending where like you're about to punch like Ralph Macchio at the end, and then it cuts off to being like, oh, it was like a dream, it was a nightmare, that sort of thing. Let me start all over. Yeah, that's a really good point. You were kind of saying that it's like multidimensional, especially that final scene where it turned out to be a complete like nightmare or dream for Daniel LaRusso. So when you were like kind of hoping that this would go well, like was there something in the back of your head of how would people think about this? Like what are the viewers supposed to expect, or even castmates like Ralph that's really inside of it, or like executive directors? Like what did you want people to think about when you're doing this scene?
Yeah, I think because, going into it, it's a dream, right? It's a dream sequence, and I wouldn't do it justice if I just went in and just like I'm just Mr. Miyagi. Because if you really look at it, it's not my interpretation. It's not Mr. Miyagi. It's a dream. It's a manifestation of whatever Daniel is feeling at the time. And obviously, if you watch part two, spoilers if you haven't, it's a lot of that anxiety, a lot of that fear, a lot of that uncertainty about his sensei, about basically his whole principles of life, and if you want to go even more meta, about his surrogate dad, and when I've had conversations, recently because I played it about this topic about Daniel looks at Mr. Miyagi as a father figure, and if you have a really good relationship with your dad, like your dad is, he does everything, you're like, oh yeah, the dad could do all this stuff. And it's coming to grips with that when you realize that your dad is a human, and I think that might come depending on who you are at a younger age. You might see your dad struggle to do something, or do something that's out of character. But for Daniel, he's never really had that, right? Because we don't know after the Karate Kid 3, we don't really know the relationship with Mr. Miyagi, but we're assuming that it was good until unfortunately Pat Morita passed away. So finding that box of things that obviously he never knew about is like a big blow to him. And that's for me, that was a reason why, coming into this dream sequence, I was like, oh, okay, so that's what this is. It's his inner demon really coming out and attacking him. But at the same time, it's really poetic because this nightmare is still trying to teach him a lesson, even though he's like, I don't get it. And um, the funny thing is, rewatching all the Karate Kid movies, the one thing that I'm like, oh, that's kind of funny. Daniel LaRusso doesn't seem to really learn the lesson until he gets into a fight. Like he needs to, either get beat up or starts fighting, and then he's like, okay, I get it, I got it. Um, so having this dream sequence is like very fitting because it's like literally Miyagi beating in this information of like, look, what you're doing is, not really helping you. You need to kind of like own your own, karate. And if you go back to, Karate Kid 3, there is a scene where, Mr. Miyagi says like, one day, it's going to be your karate, not mine, because the roots are strong. So I'm thinking that's where they kind of drew from. So me going into this part, it's like, oh, I'm not really Miyagi. I'm just sort of like this demon, really kind of think of like this nightmare. So that's what you can see in the performance. Or like I don't have a familiar tone of my voice when I'm even talking to Daniel. It's just like, you know, what are you doing kind of thing. It's very kind of like disdain, almost to the point of like I'm disappointed in you, you know. And really that's Daniel doing that to himself. He's not living up to what he thinks Mr. Miyagi would want him to do, in my interpretation of that. So, and then that also helped with the fight, because otherwise, I don't think the fight would have, even though I know it's choreographed and all that stuff. Like if you're doing it as a performance, you have to commit to, really beating the opponent, right? Um, so that was really my own unique take on it, knowing that it was a dream sequence. This is not like canonically like Mr. Miyagi. This is just, Daniel LaRusso's uh, imagery of him. And if you really look at what Mr. Miyagi even looks like younger, there's a lot of like comments going around like, oh, I'm too tall, or the hair's not right, or what. And I'm like, that all still works if you really think about it, because this is what Daniel Russo thinks Mr. Miyagi looked like when he was younger. If this was back, like if this was reality, if this was back in, I want to say, maybe it would have to be 1950s, because if it was 1940s, he wouldn't be in a martial arts tournament. He would probably be in Manzanar. So after the war, right, he would probably have shorter hair than what I had, which is funny because I actually get a haircut on set because they wanted. I had longer hair and they cut it. Um, and the fact that he's taller, I think it's just that it's more of a visual representation of not really like the, yeah, I guess so. It's like the, putting Mr. Miyagi on a pedestal. Like you see someone taller, bigger than what they really are. It's kind of like, like I said, with your parents. Even though your parents, and then also for Mr. Miyagi, shrink over time because everyone gets smaller, you still might see them as like the adult, right? So to me, all of that worked. And Ralph Macchio is taller than me, even though when you look at a picture, that's, but because he's kind of squatting down, but if he stands straight up, he is taller than me. So, but again, I'm assuming that Daniel saw pictures of people from the 1940s, 1950s, and that's why my hair is the way it is. I my gi, my dogi is, he wouldn't be wearing a Miyagi Do dogi if you really think about it, because there wasn't a Miyagi Do back then. There was no martial arts group called Miyagi Do to be like, yeah, you're part of our group. So he wouldn't have that, right? He would just be probably in just like generic, or maybe even without any sort of dogi. I don't know. But what you saw was the fact that that's what he projected out, and it's very similar to what he was wearing, except for the headband. Um, I like to think of it when I rewatch the scene as though he's like kind of fighting against himself. He's using this Miyagi visage as an opponent, but really it's him. He's battling with himself and trying to figure out, well, what am I doing wrong? So because I got to work with Ralph, Ralph was there on set. I think it was a pretty close set because I remember once I got in, I don't think I was able to leave. They were just like, oh, just hang out here. And I think they just didn't want other people, because like when we were filming, like nobody really sort of walked in. It was only towards like the end where people from the crew and the cast were coming in. But for the most part, it was just, the writers, producers, executive producers, and Ralph and myself. So I was able to talk to Ralph a lot. Um, and to your question, the one thing that he told me was like, you sound and it feels like I'm still working with Pat. And I was like, wow. He goes, yeah. He goes, it gives me goosebumps, like. And I was like, well, he goes, like, I don't really. He's like, I don't really have to do too much because like it's all there, So if you watch even the scene in Ralph's uh, part where he's talking, there's parts where he's getting emotional, so because he was saying, yeah, it's so easy because you channel him so well that this scene, even for himself, it's hard to do because it's like you never really see, Mr. Miyagi and Daniel, you know, fighting or exchanging blows and things like that. So that was the best, if any, compliment I can get, having actual, Daniel LaRusso saying like, yeah, you sound like Mr. Miyagi, and so and I think the second one would be later on, an AD sent me a message from William Zabka or Billy that yeah, that they're like, yeah, I guess we got the right guy. He did a great job. And he's like, I just wanted to pass that on to you. And I was like, great, cool. I never got to meet him because he was off doing something else, but that was really nice to have both of them just to kind of give me like their, tip of the hat and be like, yeah, great job.
Yeah, what's kind of cool about this episode is like the Saikai Taikai is a part of like the storyline, but it really is that Mr. Miyagi is like the bad guy, or no one would think that he's like going to do something like this. So, how did you want the audience to feel when watching this scene? Like, how did you make sure that the audience is going to like eat this up in some degree?
Yeah, so because I wasn't given any sort of backstory to the scene. It was really just like that scene, you know. Um, it was I really didn't have anything to go off of. And honestly, I didn't really think of it as a bad guy. I looked at it as like, okay, if this was real, you have to look at, Mr. Miyagi as a character, as a whole, right? Even though on the surface level he is supposed to be an all-knowing, all-wise, mystic Asian guru, you know, uh, wise man type, archetype. But delving into his backstory, he's a war veteran. He probably has PTSD. He probably has, his own vices, alcoholism, whatever, whatnot. Um, if you took all that and you distilled it down into, someone who's in probably like their early 30s, late 30s, dealing with all this racism coming in, after the war, right? Um, Going through war, thinking that you're making a difference, and then you come back and everyone still sees you as the enemy. That's all that stuff does something for you, and nobody knows him as Mr. Miyagi. They're just like, oh, that's a Japanese guy, that's one of the right. And so if in the tournament, if that, if wherever that story goes to, he's really just kind of living his life at that moment in time. And unfortunately, from what the story says, he, looks like he took a life. I don't know. Again, I don't know anything past, part two. That's really all they've given me. Um, but to say that, oh, going into it as a bad guy, I think that's kind of like a trap too. Like if you go out, just purely speaking as like an actor, if you go out and you play a bad guy as a bad guy, I think, it becomes very one note. Like you go in playing that you're not the bad guy, like like you're the bad guy, I'm the good guy, even though obviously you're so, going into this role, uh, it was a similar feeling where it's like, okay, I have to look at this. If this was like not a dream, I have to look at it as like, why is he doing this? Why is he fighting when he is so anti-fighting? What's his motivation behind it? And it could just be a lot of things where the most part is his whole stance on, you know, not fighting might have stemmed from these past experiences, knowing that, getting into fights, doing this stuff always ultimately leads to more pain. And that's where the other movies come in, where he goes, someone always gets hurt in a fight. There's really no winners, right? Someone always gets hurt. So that speaks volumes. Like that's the whole point of even martial artists. I mean, you're a martial artist too, so but when we learn it, we're not learning it to actually like kick someone's ass. Like it's really to know to avoid confrontation, but out at the same time, know when there is danger, and then you have options to deal with it. I think talking to the most accomplished martial artists, they're like the best defense is just to run away, just be like, bye, unless you need to protect someone, obviously, right? But it's really just like, yeah, you see a bad situation, you're like, yeah, I'm not gonna get myself into that. I'm gonna get myself away from that. But if you're put into a situation where you need to fight, right? And I'm guessing that's Miyagi at that point. He was put into a situation where he needed to fight, but he probably got to a place where maybe that situation became easier to get into, and kind of forgetting his teachings, and then led him to a dark place. And I'm really seeing him teaching Daniel was his way of, kind of paying that back, being like, okay, I can make good on the stuff that I wasn't able to do when I was younger.
So when you saw like the entire episode like together in one whole length, did you ever think that there was going to be like an aha moment when you were like performing this role? Or was there something like the viewers were saying that you didn't honestly think that would be very like pivotal? Like, what was like your first reactions watching the full episode?
So the funny thing is, I didn't see the episode really until it aired. I did a couple interviews prior to, and they were able to show me like little clips of it, but because it was just over Zoom, it wasn't the whole thing. It was just literally like you could hear the audio, you could see the picture, then it would like jump to another thing. So you didn't get the whole thing whatsoever. Um, but I think the one thing that I saw, and I think what most people are talking about, was just that it's alluding to Mr. Miyagi having, like I just talked about, a darker past. It wasn't just all like, oh, I'm just a happy gardener, working on these apartments and making bonsai trees. I think it's like, oh, this guy has gone through some stuff. And to me, everybody that I know in real life who is very serene and calm and peaceful or just very wise, they have gone through so much pain. And the thing is, they never tell you, because it's like, especially Japanese American people, just, people who I know, because they don't want to burden you with that. They're like, that's something you don't need to. I showed her that way. You don't have to. But you can learn from my mistakes. So watching that scene, just like, because you can picture how it is doing it. You're like, okay, great, But watching it actually play out, I was like, wow, the angles that they picked, the moments that they picked to show on screen are very telling, and a lot of them is, um, if you look at it, it is very teacher student still teaching, right? Though the moment where they have, Pat Morita come back and CGI saying, I never, Miyagi doesn't tell you everything, Daniel. It's like that in itself is like, wow, okay, there's more to it. Like the fact that he's saying, I did not tell you everything, you know. And I think the whole line is like because you're never strong enough to know truth. I think honestly that's to the general audience. I think most people are like Daniel when they keep Mr. Miyagi in this very sacred place. And to put him in a place other than that, I think is very scary. I mean, even myself, when part one came out and there's like this box of stuff, and he's tied to like stealing liquor. And I was like, what? I'm like, I'm playing the guy, and I'm still like, what? No, you can't do that. Um, but that to me was like the biggest thing. That was like foreshadowing, like there's more to this character than what we are being told. And if that means uh, another show or something else, great. I don't really know, but to me, if I wasn't playing that part and just watching, that's where my brain would be going to. Like, oh, there's going to be more story with this younger version. There's something, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. You were kind of saying that it's like multidimensional, especially that final scene where it turned out to be a complete like nightmare or dream for Daniel LaRusso. So when you were like kind of hoping that this would go well, like was there something in the back of your head of how would people think about this? Like what are the viewers supposed to expect? Or even castmates like Ralph that's really inside of it, or like executive directors? Like what did you want people to think about when you're doing this scene?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, going into it, you're playing such an iconic character. Let's just be clear. You're going in and you're Mr. Miyagi. And so even walking into the set itself, there was this like presence of like, oh, that's the guy. That's the guy. But it's really hard to explain. I think in retrospect, it was more of like this, not uneasiness, but just like nervousness of like, oh, I hope we picked the right guy, And in my head, it translated as like, don't fuck up, Brian. Sorry to cuss, but like, don't mess up, don't mess this up. Um, and After we did the scene, and it was just, we were just kind of doing all the little preliminary shots of like the background, stuff like that. Everyone, all that sort of just like lifted. They were all rejoicing and, saying, hey, great job. And to me, that was like, oh, you know, I sort of passed the test, and going to the audience, that's the other thing, right? And I think on the same thing with like Daniel and Ralph too, like Ralph wanted to do this scene for a very long time. He told me, he's like, we wanted to do this for a very long time, but we just couldn't figure out how to do it or when to do it. And him being executive producer, I'm pretty sure that they were like putting in the different seeds in different seasons to be like, okay, we're planting this, you know, no pun intended, we're planting this tree, and then we're kind of forming it to grow in a way that we can actually tell this story. Um, and it's interesting to see because I think, I mean, I can't speak for him, but this is just my experience watching him. You know, Ralph and Daniel, they have a lot of each other, in the character and the actor himself, right? Um, and it's really cool to see Ralph as like the producer, executive producer, and then as the actor. Executive producer, producer role is like he has to juggle all these different things, you know, at the same time, be present in the scene. So one example was like when we were pretty much wrapping up our scene, it was a shot where they needed to get a very specific angle for me to strike to so they could do the CG morphing thing. And Ralph is like, oh, I gotta go to this, but he goes, no, I'll stay. He's like, you need me for eyeline, right? I'll lie on the ground. And I was like, no, no, man, you go. He's like, you sure? If you need me, just. And that's his producer brain being like, oh, I need to go do this. I need to change this. But the difference was when he was, you know, Daniel, in that scene, all that sort of just like kind of melted away. And I like to think that the fact that because I reminded him of Pat, like he was able to kind of like drop all that, worry. Because again, he's also an executive producer. He's probably still looking at me and being like, can this guy really do it? Can this guy really, right? Right, because you don't know, right? But the moment, and you could tell, it's like when you're actually like sparring with someone, you could actually tell when someone is nervous or someone is confident, right? And there was a little change in the scene where like Ralph Danielson, whoever you want, became that, and he was just Daniel, and it really you could really feel that. So translating that to the audience, I'm hoping that that is what you guys are seeing, where it's like, you know, the fact that everybody sort of put all their chips on the table for to cast me, not to put me in like a big thing, but it was literally that. And the fact that they felt good about it, I felt good about it. You know, and then watching it, it's like, oh yeah, that all makes sense. I'm not like I did you exactly, crystal clear. I'm not Pat Morita. I'm not gonna look like him 100%. That and it's cool that I have similar features to Pat. But at the same time, you know, in this particular scene, it's a dream. So you can really kind of do, whatever you want in this one. But we try to do the best, as we can. I think in terms of what you brought up, spirit and just like, energy of Mr. Miyagi, not so much Pat Morita. That's the important thing. I remember reading one of these comments, and I think it was like the best comment that I've read, where someone goes, he doesn't really look like a young Pat Morita, but he definitely looks like a young Mr. Miyagi. And I'm like, yes, that's the thing, right? And that's what I want the audience to sort of look at. It's like, I'm never going to replace Pat Morita, and I'm not trying to be, like he's one of the all-time greats. But if you want more of Mr. Miyagi's story, you got to look at it through that lens and being like, oh, okay, it's not Pat, it's Mr. Miyagi, and Mr. Miyagi probably looked different, similar but looked different when he was younger. If you don't believe me, look back at your parents' pictures and be like, oh yeah, they don't look exactly the same when they were like in their 60s back in so, and they're probably even not like the same height too. But in terms of the scene, that's what I was hoping that people were going to take out of it, where because again, not knowing what it looks like is just like, okay, I did my best, Ralph and I did our best. Everybody did their best to portray this scene to the best that they could. And for the most part, I think the fan base has been pretty positive. So, that's kind of like a, you know, load off my shoulders. So, but yeah, we're never gonna have, a young Pat Morita playing a young Mr. Miyagi, unfortunately. So, we got to look at the next thing, whatever that is, right? If it's me or some other actor that they get, hopefully me, but I'll still be okay with like if they get someone else too, but because it's I would personally like to see that story as if it's told well, if it's told right and it's told well, I'd love to see that story. So
So when the episode like officially became like aired on Netflix, like were you like staring at your phone waiting for like that first comment on Instagram or waiting for that email saying like great job Brian, loved what you did? Like what were you thinking when that episode just came out and what was like the reaction like in the first few hours?
not really. I honestly like so the fan um just support from the fan base has been astronomical. It's like I keep saying, it's very humbling. Um, there's so many fans out there who, it takes a lot to, even though it doesn't seem like it takes a lot to kind of go out to socials, find the person, leave a comment, because you never know. Maybe I could be a total asshole and be like, haha, whatever. You're putting yourself out there, right? I'm not, by the way, but it, yes, it was, I wasn't really waiting. I was, when the episode came out, I had a small group of friends to kind of watch it and do that. And I was expecting like a couple of my friends to like, message me and be like, oh, hey, good job, and family members do that. But it was a complete opposite. They were like complete strangers. People I've never even met were the first ones to be like, "Oh my God, you did such a great job," and I'm like, "I don't even know who you are." And then slowly, it's like my friends and like family members are like, "Wait, you're what?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm Mr. Miyagi," and they're like, they think I'm joking. They're like, "Did they watch it?" Even today, I had somebody just reach out to me just randomly and just ask how I was doing, and I was like, "Oh, I'm doing good," and they were like, "That's kind of a generic." Answer. What's, I need details. What's going on? And I was like, well, just check my Instagram. It's probably the quickest way. And then maybe like 2 minutes later, it's like, holy crap! Like what? And I was like, yeah, yeah. I mean, so it's slowly rolling in, but I wasn't expecting this much fanfare coming from the fan base. I knew that it was a big deal. And I think to me, the people who knew. Um, Going into it. There's very, very few, just like my family. Like it wasn't like a big deal to them. They're just like, oh, that's cool. That's nice. I think the biggest reaction I got was from Tam and Tomita, because she was like, oh my God, because she gets it. And then later on, it's like I noticed that a lot of the community, okay, besides the people who are Karate Kid, Cobra Kai fans, people who don't even know the show whatsoever, but they happen to be Japanese American, are like, that's a big deal, man. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, it is a big deal, yeah. Other people who just kind of know Mr. Miyagi in the peripherals of their mind are just like, oh, yeah, that's cool. All right, yeah, good for you. In my mind, I'm like, do you not understand that like this is Mr. Miyagi? He's like the most iconic character from the 80s and 90s. Like everybody knows Mr. Miyagi, yeah. But until they see it, I don't think it actually registers where it's like, oh, oh no, you're him. Like I don't know what they're thinking. I think they might understand like, oh, you're just like they call you Mr. Miyagi or something, but you're really not him. But like, oh no, you're actually canonically him, you know. So yeah, I there was no waiting by anything. It and it wasn't just like instantaneous, like my Instagram blew up or anything like that. It was a slow trickle, I would say, in the next couple like weeks and stuff like that. And now, yeah, you know, it's great. You know, I get to really, you know, reach out to the fan base and like people like you too who ask for interviews and you know want to hear my humble story of getting this part. But all in all, that's what it is. It's very humbling to know that um, my portrayal of Mr. Miyagi is taken so positively. Because that, to me, at the end of the day, that's the biggest compliment. Where if people got emotional seeing my performance, or it made them remember how they felt when they first saw the Karate Kid or whatever Karate Kid that you first saw. People sharing those experiences with me through, you know, Instagram, Facebook, and stuff like that. That to me is the best. You know, like it's great. That's something that I could always take with me. You know, if this is the extent of what I'm doing, and that's it, that's fine. I, like to me, as long as you know you guys, the fans, really liked it, and it's something that you guys cherish, that I did a good job. Yeah. So
Yeah, as we're like wrapping up the podcast, what is some advice that you would want to give to viewers that are trying to find their role models like Mr. Miyagi or some shape or form of it? Like, what would you try to tell those like young audience, like viewership?
that's a great question, a really great question. I think everybody in their lives has a Mr. Miyagi. They might not be Japanese. They might not be an old, you know, Asian man. But I think, and if they are, great. But I think, you know, everybody in their life has someone like that. And I think the best advice I can give is like anybody who you look at as a mentor, or you might even just maybe you don't even think of them as a mentor, but like someone you can depend on, right? And really, that kind of boils down to like your parents, right? I would just say, you know, spend time with them, right? Pay attention to them, pay attention to what they're telling you, especially now these days, you know, where we look at, you know, role models and figures from other places, other medias and things like that. But really, and again, if it's not a parent, maybe it's a teacher, someone who's really kind of impacted your life. I mean, really look at Daniel LaRusso as an example. You know, he growing up, I mean, we don't really know what happened to his dad or his dad, but Mr. Miyagi was able to step into that role and really guide him in a way so he became a very successful car salesman using, you know, the All Valley tournament as his like ramp. But imagine that didn't happen. Like, you know what, like where would he have ended up, you know? Um, and you know, we're lucky that in the Karate Kid Cobra Kai world, and this is gonna get a little dark, there's really no other weapons, right? We don't really see like guns or knives or things like that. It's mostly just like fighting, which is still not good, but you know, the words behind Mr. Miyagi saying that, you know, fighting, someone always gets hurt. You know, you could take that into any situation, right? Even if it's like a verbal fight. And if you have anybody in your life that's ever taught you to kind of steer away from that or try to, you know, tell you in a way, hey, don't do it, right? And it might not be something that you automatically will recognize as sage words of advice, just like Daniel. Like he got pissed off too. He's like, look, I waxed your car, I paint your house, I did all your stuff to the floor. You didn't teach me anything, right? And then he's like, okay, show me sand on the floor, right? And then he's like, "Ah, ta, 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 pa, pa," right? And if you have someone like that, you need to hold on to them because just like Pat, you know, they're not going to be there forever. Um, and being able to play, you know, Mr. Miyagi for myself really kind of put that into perspective, being like, oh, you know, there might be some people who are going to be looking up to me now. I mean, if you are great, but I wouldn't recommend it. But you know, but if you are, but at the same time, makes me a better person because I'm like, look, there's more eyes watching me now than they were before, you know, this role. So it puts me kind of on check to be like, okay, how would I handle a situation, like road rage or whatever, right? Like it would be really sucky if like I'm on the news and like, actor who plays Mr. Miyagi gets into a fist fight with like, I mean, there might be some people who actually dig that, but like at the same time, it's like, if you're looking at this guy to be like, oh, he's, a good role model, like now I'm doing something dumb like that. It's like, okay, that kind of counter, puts everything that I work for down the drain. So, you know, that would be my thing where like, it's good to look for role models in the media, but you have great ones just in arm's reach, right? Again, it could be a close friend, it could be sibling, cousin, teacher, parent, anybody, like I said, I think there's not I think there is a Mr. Miyagi in everyone's life. We just have to kind of really, listen to them, even if we don't want to. And then just remember, Daniel didn't want to listen to Mr. Miyagi in the beginning. It was just after they kind of went through that, and Daniel really appreciated what he was doing for him, then their connection, their relationship grew, right? So, but that's a great question. I mean, that's a great, especially for the younger viewers out there, like I would say you guys still have your whole lives ahead of you, so, look for people like that, like they're, and at the same time, look for people who may be kind of like Terry Silver, right? There's a lot of Terry Silvers out there too. You don't wanna follow them. Not saying that the actor Thomas Time is a great guy, the character, no, right? Use your own wisdom too, to kind of help guide you. Like like going back to the whole, the roots are strong, right? So you gotta make sure that your own roots are strong. So.
Yeah, Brian, that was really well spoken. And you're always going to be a part of like cinema history with like the Karate Kid and Cobra Kai, like franchise. Um, is there any like last minute message you want to give out to the viewers that are watching this podcast?
Yeah, I just again just a big thank you to the Karate Kid Cobra Kai fan base. It brightens my day to see you guys your comments on Instagram, on just like the different um clips and reactions on the YouTube. I do stalk, so just letting you know, I have a lot of time on my hands, especially at the end of the year, so I do lurk and look at all of them. But just again, thank you so much for the support and the love. It's very touching. I know it's very cliche, but it is, especially for an actor to know that their performances really touch so many people's lives. So yeah.